Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Hub. Today's story is one of my favorites.
Picture this, a sun-drenched studio in Loyola, canvases stretched floor to ceiling, the smell of turpentine and possibility thick in the air. That was our world, mine and Daryl's. At least that's what I thought. I was 26 when I met Daryl Hutchins. He was everything I wasn't: confident, charismatic, already making waves in the San Diego art scene. I was the shy girl from East LA who painted like her life depended on it, because honestly, it did. Art was my oxygen, my language, my way of making sense of a world that had never quite made sense to me. Daryl swept into my life like a hurricane, all passion and grand gestures. He'd stand behind me while I painted, his hands on my shoulders, whispering about how talented I was, how I was going to change the art world. "We're going to be a power couple," he'd say, and God help me, I believed him. The first time he signed his name to one of my paintings, I actually thanked him. Can you believe that? I thanked him for helping me get recognition. He convinced me that his name carried weight, that galleries would take us seriously if his signature was on the canvas. "It's just temporary," he promised, "until you build your own reputation." 6 years, 6 years of temporary. 6 years of watching my soul poured onto canvas get attributed to someone else. 6 years of living like a ghost in my own life. I painted everything: abstract pieces that screamed with color and emotion, portraits that captured the raw humanity and forgotten faces, landscapes that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. But when the critics raved, when the collectors paid top dollar, when the magazines featured the brilliant work of Daryl Hutchins, I stood in the background, smiling like the supportive girlfriend I'd been trained to be. The worst part? I started to believe it myself. Maybe I wasn't that talented. Maybe I needed him. Maybe without Daryl, I was just another struggling artist who'd never amount to anything. The night everything changed started like any other gallery opening. Daryl was holding court near my latest piece, a massive canvas I'd called Fractured Dawn. It showed a city skyline breaking apart like shattered glass, but through the cracks, this golden light poured through, so bright it almost hurt to look at. I painted it during one of my darkest periods, when I felt like I was disappearing entirely. I watched from across the room as Daryl explained his inspiration to a circle of admirers. He talked about his struggle with identity, his journey through darkness to find light. My struggle, my journey, my darkness and my light. "The thing about art," he said, gesturing at my painting with a wine glass, "is that it has to come from a place of authentic pain. You can't fake that kind of emotional depth, authentic pain." I almost laughed. He had no idea what authentic pain felt like. That's when I saw her, Julia Morris, the art critic whose reviews could make or break careers. She was standing apart from the crowd, not looking at Daryl, but at me. Really looking at me, like she could see straight through to my soul. Our eyes met across the room, and I swear, something electric passed between us. Not romantic, not yet, but recognition. Like she saw something everyone else had missed. I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped out of the gallery, away from the praise that should have been mine, away from the man who'd built his career on my talent. I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. I just left. I found myself at the Chula Vista Marina, sitting on the edge of a dock with my legs dangling over the water. The sun was setting, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, and I had a bottle of wine that I was determined to finish. Maybe if I drank enough, I could forget. Maybe I could disappear completely. The sound of footsteps on the wooden dock made me look up. It was her Julia Morris, still in her tailored blazer, but her sharp edges softened by the dying light. "That painting," she said quietly, sitting down beside me without invitation, "the one with the fractured skyline. It's yours, isn't it?" I stiffened. This was it. This was where someone finally called me out for the fraud I'd let myself become. But Julia kept talking, her voice gentle but certain. I've seen his other work. It's derivative, flat, but yours? Yours breathes. It has a voice all its own. I felt something crack inside my chest, not breaking, but opening. Like the first ray of sunlight after a storm. No one's ever seen my art like that, I whispered, and my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Not even me. Julia turned to face me fully, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before, not pity, but respect, partnership, possibility. Come on, she said, standing and extending her hand. Let's get you a real drink. We ended up at this dimly lit bar downtown, the kind of place where jazz music hummed low and the bartender knew when to listen and when to disappear. Julia ordered us both whiskey neat, no ice, no chaser. The kind of drink that burned going down and forced you to face the truth. Tell me everything, she said, and for the first time in years, I did. I told her about the first painting Daryl had signed, about the gradual erosion of my identity, about how I'd become a stranger in my own life. I told her about the nights I'd lie awake wondering if I was crazy, if I was selfish for wanting credit for my own work. Julia listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that cut straight to the heart of things. She had this way of making me feel like my feelings were valid, like my anger was justified. You know, she said when I finally stopped talking, I've been watching the art scene for 15 years. I can spot a phony from a mile away. And I've been watching Daryl for the past 3 years, wondering where the hell his talent was coming from. She leaned forward, her eyes intense. Elizabeth, you're not just an artist. You're a force of nature. And forces of nature don't hide in shadows. That night, for the first time in years, I went home and painted. Not for Daryl, not for any gallery or collector, but for me. I painted my rage, my confusion, my hope. I painted the woman I used to be and the woman I was becoming. Julia wasn't just a critic, she was a detective. A shark who'd smelled blood in the water. Over the next few weeks, she taught me things I'd never thought to learn. How to demand contracts, how to track sales, how to fight. Art isn't just about creation. She told me one afternoon as we sat in her cluttered office, surrounded by stacks of art magazines and gallery catalogs. It's about business. And honey, you've been getting screwed. She showed me how to dig into records, how to follow paper trails, how to ask the right questions. What we found made my blood run cold. Daryl hadn't just been stealing credit for my work, he'd been selling it multiple times over. Creating limited editions that weren't limited at all. Bank transfers, fake receipts, forged signatures, it was all there. A web of lies that stretched back years. But the real bombshell came when Julia slammed a thick file down on her desk, her face grim. He's not just stealing from you, she said. He's running a whole forgery ring. Your paintings? They're the legitimate front for his counterfeit operation. I stared at the photos she'd uncovered Daryl shaking hands with known black market dealers, meeting with forgers, orchestrating a criminal enterprise that used my genuine talent to legitimize his fake empire. I wanted to burn his world down, I told Julia, and she smiled, a nice smile, but a dangerous one. Lucky for you, she said. I know exactly how to light the match. Working with the authorities was surreal. FBI agents sitting in coffee shops, discussing my art like evidence in a crime thriller, because that's what it was, a crime. My stolen identity, my hijacked career, my silenced voice, it was all criminal. The sting operation was planned like a military strike. Daryl thought he was meeting with a new collector, someone interested in purchasing a rare Hutchins original. Instead, he walked into a trap that had been months in the making. I watched from a surveillance van as they arrested him, This man who'd controlled my life for 6 years. As the handcuffs clicked shut, I saw his smirk vanish, replaced by confusion, then fear, then rage. He looked around frantically, as if he could charm his way out of federal charges. That's when I stepped out of the van. "Elizabeth?" he said, his voice small and confused. "What are you doing here?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he'd never been as big as I'd thought. He was just a man, a scared, mediocre man who'd built his entire identity on stolen dreams. "I'm taking back what's mine," I said, and walked away. Legal proceedings took months, but I didn't waste time waiting for justice. I threw myself into my work with a fury I'd never experienced before. Julia helped me set up a new studio, introduced me to galleries, connected me with collectors who cared about authenticity. For the first time in years, I signed my own name to my paintings, Elizabeth Garcia. Not hidden in the corner, not as a collaboration, but bold and proud across the bottom of each canvas. My style evolved during those months. The pain was still there, but it had transformed into something powerful, something defiant. I painted women emerging from shadows, cities rebuilding themselves, light breaking through darkness. My work became a conversation between destruction and creation, between loss and reclamation. Julia was there through all of it, not just as a critic or a mentor, but as a friend. She had this way of pushing me to be better, to dig deeper, to find the courage I'd buried under years of doubt. "You paint like you're having a conversation with the divine," she told me one evening as we stood in my studio, surrounded by my latest pieces. "Don't ever let anyone silence that voice again." I turned to look at her, this woman who'd saved my career and my sanity, and realized that somewhere along the way, my feelings had shifted from gratitude to something deeper. 1 year after that, night at the marina, I stood in the Pemberton Gallery, surrounded by my work. My name, Elizabeth Garcia, gleamed on the wall in bold letters, "Untamed Light." The paintings told the story of my journey from shadows to illumination. Critics called it a masterpiece of emotional archaeology, a triumph of authentic voice over manufactured celebrity. But those words, as good as they felt, weren't what mattered most. What mattered was Julia, radiant in a sleek black dress, pressing a champagne flute into my hand and whispering to the artist. The gallery was packed. Collectors fought over my pieces. Critics praised my authentic vision and uncompromising honesty. Everything I'd dreamed of for years was finally happening. But when I looked at Julia, none of that mattered. What mattered was the way she looked at me, not as a commodity or a story to be told, but as a person worth knowing, worth loving. "You did it," she said, and I could hear the pride in her voice. "We did it," I corrected and pulled her close. The kiss happened in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by my art and the people who'd come to celebrate it. It should have been inappropriate, unprofessional, scandalous. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Julia tasted like champagne and possibility. When we broke apart, she was smiling that dangerous smile I'd grown to love. "I have to tell you something," she said, her voice low enough that only I could hear. I didn't just happen to be at that gallery opening. I'd been tracking Daryl's career for months, trying to figure out where his talent was coming from. I came that night specifically to meet you. "You knew?" I asked, not sure whether to be flattered or horrified. "I suspected, but I didn't know I was going to fall in love with you." The admission hung in the air between us, bold and beautiful and terrifying. "Good thing," I said, "because I was going to fall in love with you anyway." We kissed again, deeper this time, and I felt something I'd never experienced before, complete certainty. This was right. This was real. This was mine. As the evening wore on, I found myself standing in front of my favorite piece from the collection, a painting I'd called Phoenix Rising. It showed a woman emerging from flames, not destroyed by them, but transformed. Her wings spread wide against a sky full of stars. A journalist approached, notebook in hand. Miss Garcia, this piece is particularly striking. Can you tell us about the inspiration? I looked at the painting, then at Julia, who was across the room discussing my technique with a potential collector. She caught my eye and winked. It's about rebirth, I said, still looking at her. About discovering that sometimes the things that try to destroy us actually show us how strong we are. Sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the most beautiful transformation. The journalist scribbled notes, but I wasn't really talking to her anymore. I was talking to everyone who'd ever felt invisible, overlooked, silenced. I was talking to the woman I used to be. Art isn't just about creating something beautiful, I continued. It's about creating something true. And sometimes the truth is ugly and painful and complicated. But when you're honest about that pain, when you transform it into something meaningful, that's when real art happens. 3 months later, Daryl was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for fraud, forgery, and money laundering. The story made national news. Art World scandal exposes stolen identity ring. My face was on the cover of Art Monthly, not as a victim, but as a survivor. The financial restitution was substantial, but money wasn't what mattered. What mattered was validation. What mattered was justice. What mattered was that my voice had been heard. Julia and I moved in together into a loft in the arts district where I could paint and she could write. She was working on a book about authenticity in art, about the importance of protecting emerging artists from exploitation. You're going to change everything, she told me one morning as we sat on our balcony, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the city. We're going to change everything, I corrected, and she laughed. Always the optimist, she said. Always the realist, I replied, because I know what we're capable of together. 6 months after my gallery debut, I was invited to exhibit at the Museum of Contemporary Art. The exhibition was called Reclaimed: Artists Who Refused to Disappear, and featured work by women who'd overcome various forms of artistic suppression. Standing in that museum, surrounded by my paintings and the work of other women who'd fought for their voices, I felt something I'd never experienced before: belonging. Not just to the art world, but to a community of warriors who refused to be silenced. Julia gave a lecture at the exhibition opening about the importance of supporting authentic voices in art. She spoke about the dangers of artistic colonization, about how the industry had a responsibility to protect emerging artists from exploitation. Art is not a commodity, she said, her voice carrying across the crowded auditorium. It's a conversation between the artist and the world. When we allow that conversation to be hijacked, when we let someone else's voice speak for an artist, we don't just rob the artist, we rob the world of something irreplaceable. I watched from the audience, my heart swelling with pride and love. This woman had not only saved my career, she'd helped me find my purpose. It happened in my studio, surrounded by my latest series of paintings. Julia had been acting strange, all week, nervous in a way that was completely unlike her. She kept fumbling with something in her pocket, starting conversations and then trailing off. Finally, she stood in front of my easel, where I was working on a new piece, a portrait of two women dancing in a field of sunflowers. Elizabeth, she said, and her voice was shaking. I need to ask you something. I set down my brush and turned to face her. She was holding a small velvet box, and her hands were trembling. I know this is unconventional, she said. I know we've only been together for a year. But I also know that I want to spend the rest of my life championing your voice, supporting your dreams, and loving you with everything I have. She opened the box, revealing a ring that was uniquely, perfectly us a raw diamond set in recycled gold, unconventional and beautiful. Will you marry me? She asked, and I could see tears in her eyes. I didn't answer with words. Instead, I kissed her, deep and long and certain. When we broke apart, we were both crying. Yes, I said. Yes, yes, yes. We got married in my studio, surrounded by my paintings and a small group of friends who had supported us through everything. Julia wore a vintage dress that had belonged to her grandmother, and I wore a dress I designed myself, inspired by the colors in my Phoenix Rising painting. The ceremony was officiated by Judge Martinez, the same judge who had sentenced Daryl. She'd become something of a friend during the legal proceedings, and she seemed genuinely happy to be marrying us rather than sentencing criminals. Elizabeth and Julia, she said, you've shown us that love isn't just about finding someone who accepts you as you are. It's about finding someone who sees who you're becoming and chooses to grow alongside you. As we exchanged rings, I looked at Julia and saw my entire future, not just as an artist, but as a woman, a partner, a fighter for truth and authenticity. I promise, I said, to always use my voice, to always support your dreams, and to always remember that the most beautiful art comes from the most authentic truth. Julia was crying openly now. I promise, she said, to always see you, to always believe in you, and to always stand with you against anyone who tries to silence your voice. When we kissed as married partners, I felt something shift in the universe. This wasn't just about us anymore. This was about every artist who'd ever been silenced, every woman who'd ever been overlooked, every person who'd ever had their dreams stolen and found the courage to steal them back. 2 years later, I'm sitting in my studio, working on a new piece for my upcoming exhibition. The painting shows a woman painting herself into existence, her brushstrokes creating not just an image, but reality itself. Julia walks in with coffee and the morning paper. You made the Times again, she says, pointing to a review of my latest show. I barely glance at it. Reviews don't matter the way they used to. What matters is the work itself, the conversation. Between my soul and the canvas. How's the book coming? I ask, referring to Julia's memoir about our journey. Good, she says, settling into the chair beside my easel. I'm working on the chapter about the night we met, about how sometimes the most important connections happen in the darkest moments. I pause in my painting and look at her. 2 years of marriage, 3 years of partnership, and she still takes my breath away. Any regrets? I ask, only half joking. Only one, she says, and my heart skips a beat. I regret that it took me so long to find you. I set down my brush and take her hand. Maybe that's the point, I say. Maybe we both had to go through everything we went through to be ready for this. She squeezes my hand. Maybe you're right. I'm always right, I say, and she laughs. Always the artist, she says. Always the critic, I reply. We sit in comfortable silence, watching the morning light stream through the studio windows. My paintings surround us, testament to a journey from darkness to light, from silence to voice, from loss to love. Somewhere across town, in a medium security prison, Daryl is probably working in the library, serving the remainder of his sentence. I don't hate him anymore. I almost feel sorry for him. He had the chance to be part of something beautiful, something real, and he chose theft instead. But his betrayal, as devastating as it was, led me to Julia, led me to my voice, led me to myself. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply living authentically, loving deeply, and creating something beautiful from the ashes of what tried to destroy you. I pick up my brush and return to my painting. The woman on the canvas is almost complete now, her face strong and determined, her brush poised to create whatever comes next, just like me. You know what I learned through all of this? That authenticity isn't just about signing your name to your work. It's about having the courage to live as yourself, even when the world tries to convince you that you're not enough. I learned that love isn't just about finding someone who accepts your flaws. It's about finding someone who sees your potential and helps you become who you're meant to be. I learned that betrayal, as painful as it is, sometimes clears the way for something better. Sometimes it forces you to discover strength you didn't know you had. And I learned that the most beautiful art comes from the most authentic truth, even when that truth is ugly or painful or complicated. My name is Elizabeth Garcia. I'm an artist, a wife, a survivor, and a voice for everyone who's ever been silenced. My paintings hang in museums now, and my story has inspired other artists to fight for their recognition. But none of that matters. As much as this, I am finally, completely, authentically myself. And that, I've learned, is the greatest masterpiece of all.